Hello guys, Ancient Gameplays, I'm Fabio Pisco and welcome to my channel. As for this video we have a new GPU comparison now with the RGB comparison, let's call it that. We have the RX 7600 versus the RTX 4060 versus the Intel Arc A770 16GB. And this is one of the comparisons that I wanted to do for quite some time, but I actually had to retest all the three cards in newer games like Alan Wake 2, Starfield. Everything was retested, and even older games that had kind of a performance change. So I retested all those games, the newer games, and then made this video.
Yeah, boy.
As for pricing, we have the RX 7600 in Newegg US at $269, also including Avatar Frontiers of Pandora. We have the RTX 4060 at $309, and remember, these are the minimum prices that I found. And we have the Arc A770 16GB at $299, also bringing Assassin's Creed Mirage. As for the European prices in Mind Factory Dutchland, we have the RX 7600 at $269, basically MSRP in US and Europe. We have the RTX 4060 at €317, and the Arc A770 16GB at €329, this time not bringing Assassin's Creed Mirage. So in US, for example, we have the RX 7600 costing roughly $40 less than the RTX 4060, and it is actually funny because the last time that I tested these two cards, the 7600 and the 4060 was only, let's say, $20 over the 7600, and in that case scenario it would make absolutely no sense to get the 7600. But what about now? Which card should you get? Should you go for the cheaper 7600? Should you go for the RTX 4060 with more features, or should you go, for example, for the Intel Arc A770 that brings you 16GB VRAM and double the buzz width? Well, let's find out, but right after today's sponsor. Today's sponsor is Maximum Settings, a cloud-based gaming service where you won't need to spend thousands of dollars to upgrade your PC or a personal nuclear plant to boot up your system.
Just do it!
And for as low as 9.95 Canadian dollars a month, you can play the most recent games on your computer, even if your hardware isn't prepared. Sign up today for your full Linux gaming PC with no resource sharing and start enjoying high-level gaming on any PC. Starting with Plague Tale Requiem, we have the little RTX 4060 performing slightly better than the RX 7600, in this case by 7%, with the Arc A770 performing considerably well too. What you can see though are the bad frame times that sometimes appear through gameplay, but apart from that the performance is actually quite decent. At 1440p, the advantage the RTX 4060 had over the RX 7600 gets shorter, with the Arc A770 actually being the fastest GPU here by a little, which is interesting to see. And at 4K, it is once again the fastest GPU, as it is brute forcing its way compared to the other GPUs, but still, we're below the 30 average FPS mark, so yeah. Now with Assassin's Creed Mirage, we have the Intel card performing exceptionally bad. While it has much better frame times than in Plague Tale Requiem, the FPS numbers are just very low, with the RX 7600 being 54% faster and the RTX 4060 65% faster. At 1440p, the Arc A770 gets some ground, but it is still far behind the other two cards, performing very poorly in the scenario. Something that finally changes at 4K, where the Arc A770 matches the RX 7600 at around 40 average FPS, with both cards being slower than the RTX 4060. In Cyberpunk 2077, the Arc A770 is already presenting some really good results, and this only happened after the 1.6 update, if I recall correctly, where they also added the XeSS 1.1 to the game. Before, it was running actually pretty bad, meaning that we have optimization driver and game-sided, which is once again interesting, at least to me. At 1440p, the Arc A770 actually outmatches the other two cards, being 6% faster than both, which is actually an achievement for this GPU at the current price. Actually very nice. And at 4K, the Arc is smashing both AMD and Nvidia cards, with the RTX 4060 now being slower than the RX 7600. But once again, we're talking about 30 average FPS. Call of Duty games are well known to love RDNA 3, and the RX 7600 is no exception, being at 1080p 17% faster than the RTX 4060 and a whopping 47% faster than the RK 770 that also performs, well, quite bad. Something that doesn't change even at 1440p, where the other cards are still pushing considerably more frames, while the Intel GPU is barely managing 60 FPS. And it is only at 4K that the Arc A770 finally matches the other two GPUs, not outperform, just to match, with all of them delivering the same results at this resolution. Forza Horizon 5 is one of those games where the previous RX 6000 series had advantage over the RTX 3000 series, but it seems that the tables have actually turned on the most recent GPU lines, with the RTX 4060 now being a bit faster than the RX 7600. And both being considerably faster than the Arc A770 that once again, like in Assassin's Creed Mirage for example, suffers from a big driver overhead issue. At 1440p, that overhead gets smaller and the numbers get closer to the ones on the other two cards. And it takes 4K for the Arc A770 to be able to outmatch at least the RX 7600 that now suffers from the lack of VRAM and bandwidth, with the RTX 4060 handling the situation much better, most likely due to the CUDA cores. I believe that's the case at least. Hogwarts Legacy is another game that makes proper use of the RX 7600 that now outperforms the RTX 4060 at 1080p by a bit, with the RK 770 once again suffering from the CPU overhead it has on its drivers, being quite slower at this resolution of course. As we go into 1440p and the RAM and bandwidth demands get higher, it does get some more ground over the other cards, being now faster than the RTX 4060, with the RX 7600 now somehow being the fastest card, something that impressively does not change even at 4K, where the little AMD card actually manages to deliver the most FPS of the three. Microsoft Flight Simulator is actually the only game I saw so far where the Arc A770 performed decently well without resizable bar. I don't know if it is due to the game engine or something else, but it does work quite fine. As for the results, the Intel card manages to match the RX 7600 even at lower resolution, meaning that here once again the driver's overhead is basically null, somehow. I actually believe that this is how the card should look in all titles if well optimized. At 1440p it now outmatches the RX 7600, also delivering the best 1% lows, which was something to be expected, or something expected at least by me, and at 4K things are more or less the same, with all cards delivering result differences that would never be noticed in real gameplay. Alan Wake 2 is another recently released title, and I actually thought the RTX 4060 would be considerably faster here as Nvidia was working with Remedy for this game, but yet the RX 7600 is on par with it, with the RK 770 being once again considerably slower, not that bad, but still quite slower at 1080p. At 1440p, the Intel card starts to deliver some interesting results, very close to the ones of the other two cards, and that's because the amount of FPS being produced is way lower than it was at 1080p, so the driver's overhead won't really appear as much. As for 4K, well, we could talk about numbers, but since the values are so low, I just have them here in case you really wanted to see the data. A newer addition to our benchmarks is Avatar: Frontiers of Pandora, and remember that this game has always ray tracing enabled, and even if your card does not support hardware ray tracing, like for example the RX 5700 XT, the game will enable it software-sided. And this all to say that if the game has always ray tracing enabled, it was kind of obvious that the RX 4060 would dominate, now being 14% faster than the RX 7600, which is not actually that much sincerely, and 30% faster than the Arc A770. At 1440p all cards suffer, with the RTX 4060 actually losing performance from using rebar, somehow, and the Arc A770 catching up with the RX 7600. And at 4K the numbers once again are so low that it doesn't even matter, to be sincere. And now with the one that I posted in the community tab, I can tell you right away that no, these results are not outdated, and all the games you see here, like for example Assassin's Creed Mirage, Starfield, Alan Wake 2 and Avatar, were retested on these cards with the most recent drivers, the most recent game versions and the most recent Windows updates. And yet, I don't know if it has to do with the Starfield game engine being really old, or if it is just bad drivers from Intel, but goddammit, it is awful. At 1440p the FPS sink quite a bit, but the Arc A770 is still delivering really bad results compared to the other two cards, something that doesn't even change at 4K, leading me to believe that Intel really needs to work with Bethesda to make this game at least playable, because the frame times with this card, Jesus Christ. And as if Starfield's performance wasn't enough, we have another dud with The Last of Us, that works terribly with the Arc A770, better than Starfield for sure, but still terrible, with the RTX 4060 being 11% faster than the RX 7600 and 49% faster than the Arc A770. At 1440p things don't change that much for the Intel GPU sadly, with no GPU being able to push over 60 average FPS, or at least 60 average FPS. And at 4K we have another PowerPoint presentation, with the Arc A770 being basically on par with the RTX 4060. And it seems like there's no rest for the Intel GPU that is also performing very poorly in God of War. This I can understand as this game uses the X11, but the previous two games used the X12. Yeah, as for the results, the RX 7600 is the fastest card here, being 10% faster than the RTX 4060 and 45% faster than the Arc A770. And the Intel driver's overhead is so big that the Arc A770 barely lost FPS at 1440p, where it is now closer to the other two cards, but still considerably slower. And to finalize, we have 1440p ultra-wide, where the RTX 4060 overtakes the RX 7600 by 3 FPS, and the Arc A770 is still a dud, performing quite bad actually. And now we finally have the average FPS numbers, with the RTX 4060 being overall only slightly faster than the RX 7600 at 1080p and 1440p, and even at 4K where the difference is around 8%, I mean, we're talking about 3 FPS at most, so it is nothing relevant. As for the Arc A770, well, it is quite below the other two cards, being only able to match them at 4K, where it doesn't really matter due to the low FPS output it gives, being the main problem the fact that while it runs very well in some games, it runs like crap in others, not having kind of a middle term in most cases sadly. Let's see how the three of them actually perform in ray tracing.
We're not from here either. Stellantis locked us up here a year ago.
Starting with the first full ray tracing game, we have Metro Exodus Enhanced Edition, and it seems like the Arc GPUs were made with this game in mind, as the Arc A770 performs extremely well here, showing that it can be even faster than the RTX 4060 in ray tracing if correctly optimized, delivering better averages and 1% lows at all resolutions. As for the RX 7600, it does not perform that bad, but it is considerably slower than both the other cards. Cyberpunk 2077 is another story though, as its ray tracing was made thinking of Nvidia cards, and while the Arc A770 does considerably better than the RX 7600 here, being around 40% faster with and without upscaling, and that's a lot, it is still considerably slower than the RTX 4060, that is here 27% faster without upscaling and 38% faster with it, which makes the overall experience much more enjoyable. At 1440p, the RX 7600 is ridiculous and it can't even maintain more than 7 FPS without upscaling, and this happens due to the lack of VRAM/bandwidth, with the RTX 4060 handling things better here due to the superior ray tracing performance and of course due to the CUDA cores that help as well. And yet, the same RTX 4060 now needs upscaling to beat the Arc A770 by 26%. Resident Evil 4 has really light ray tracing implementation, and this is why the RTX 4060 barely loses performance at 1080p, while the RX 7600 is on par with the Arc A770 with ray tracing off, but slower with ray tracing on. As we go to 1440p, the Arc A770 starts performing better than the RTX 4060 with and without ray tracing, which shows the very good performance of the Intel GPUs in this game. Something that gets even more noticed at 1440p ultra-wide, where the Arc A770 is the best performing GPU here, being 7% faster than the RTX 4060 and 29% faster than the RX 7600. Very nice results. Spider-Man Remastered is a game that needs lots of VRAM and bandwidth to work well, especially with ray tracing. At 1080p, the RTX 4060 is outperforming the RX 7600 by quite a lot, with the Arc A770 being the best overall performance due to having more VRAM and bandwidth, having lower averages but way higher 1% loss compared to the RTX 4060 for example. At 1440p, the 8GB 128-bit bus cards start getting throttled like hell, while the Arc A770 is delivering a perfectly enjoyable gameplay, being 22% faster than the RTX 4060 and 54% faster than the RX 7600. At 4K it gets even worse for the AMD GPU that performs better than the RTX 4060 without ray tracing, but is much slower with it, with the Intel GPU being the best performer here, without a doubt. The last ray tracing benchmark is with Ratchet and Clank Rift Apart, and let me tell you right away that this game needs even more bandwidth than Spider-Man, and that's because it also uses direct storage. This is all to say that if it wasn't for the poor Intel optimization for this game, the Arc A770 would be smashing the other two cards in ray tracing performance, while clearly it isn't. And just for you to see that I wasn't lying, at 1440p the RX 7600 only delivers 19 average FPS with ray tracing, and even without it, it barely hits the 35 average FPS mark, showing you how much the little AMD card suffers in terms of bandwidth, with the RTX 4060 performing better due to the help of CUDA cores I suppose, or maybe due to better texture compression I guess. As for the Intel GPU, it is already outperforming the RTX 4060 here, so I suppose that with better optimization, it would become much better, like it is for example with Spider-Man Remastered.
Members of the Resistance, report to your nearest...
And the final benchmarks are the upscaling ones, starting with Ratchet and Clank. At 1440p the RTX 4060 is the fastest card as seen, being even better once we use DLSS, being 15% faster than the Arc A770 and 2.6 times the performance of the RX 7600, that gets even lower performance when using upscalers, with the same exact thing happening at 4K as well. And you might ask why, and I'll tell you once again: bandwidth. This game needs lots of it because it uses direct storage that speeds up the loading of the data but requires lots of bandwidth to do it. And if you're joining the upscaling to the mix, well, things get even worse. I mean, if the card is already struggling with bandwidth at native resolution, it will have even less when you're trying to use an upscaler. Hence, why the RX 7600 performs worse with FSR and XeSS. And the last game is Spider-Man Remastered once again, where the RX 7600 now works much better at 1440p, with FSR actually making the best performer here, with the RTX 4060 being the worst one somehow, and at 4K the Arc A770 just dominates the other two cards, once again because it has double the VRAM capacity and buzz width, being faster natively and especially with upscaling. which just shows once again how well the Intel card performs in this game. Let's move to the conclusion then. So guys, conclusion. As you saw, well, the RTX 4060 and, well, let's just say that before anything, there is absolutely no reason that I can think of for buying the Arc A770 over the other two cards. It has 16GB for sure, and in some rare scenarios, it actually performs better due to having once again the 16GB over the other two cards that have only 8GB, let's say Ratchet and Clank, and especially Spider-Man Remastered when using ray tracing. But in any other scenario, which is the vast majority of scenarios, well, there is absolutely no reason, because, for example, both the RX 7600 and the RTX 4060 are faster in terms of rasterization and are faster in terms of ray tracing. Apart from, let's say, of course, Metro Exodus and those same odd scenarios where bandwidth and VRAM actually, well, makes a difference. And those are mostly at higher resolutions, which these cards are not aimed to. And with this said, I can also tell you that there is absolutely no reason to get the RX 7600 over the RTX 4060. The RX 7600 is of course cheaper, and that's about it. That's all you get. You get a cheaper card. But the RTX 4060 is not only faster in terms of rasterization, it is also much faster in terms of ray tracing. It has a better upscaler, DLSS, and to top this all, it only consumes 120 watts compared to the 150 watts stock and 200 watts overclocked on the RX 7600. And well, you have CUDA cores, for example, that you can use for several applications, for several professional applications. It's a win-win situation. If you can spend those extra 40 euros or 40 bucks, definitely do it, because the RTX 4060 is definitely the card to get in between these three, at least in my opinion, of course. But you can still get the RX 7600, for example, if you are on a really tight budget, and those 40 euros more or 40 bucks more will allow you to get a better CPU, or let's say will allow you to get an NVMe hard drive, for example, or in this case solid state drive, not hard drive. They will allow you to get another disk, they will allow you to get more RAM, and if you are on a really tight budget, that might be it. And at the same time, you have packed Avatar Frontiers of Pandora, while with the RTX 4060 you have no games attached. So you have the game already, you have 40 bucks to spend on another part, but besides that, there's no reason once again to get it over the RTX 4060. And the Intel Arc A770, well, you get it only if you want professional applications that use more than 8GB, or if you just want to fiddle a bit with Intel software and see how these cards improve over time. Overall, they're still not worth it over the AMD and Nvidia ones, not even in terms of price performance. And well guys, that's all for this video. Thank you very much for watching, hope you enjoyed the video. Don't forget, leave a comment in the comment section and tell me which card would you get and why exactly. And yeah, I guess that's basically it. I just said to myself that it's like 2 AM, something like that, 1:30 AM, maybe. I don't really know and I don't really care, but it's really late. But I said to myself that I just wouldn't go to sleep before releasing this video, because I told you that I would get this video done, and it is done ASAP. It was done ASAP. Thank you very much. Don't forget, leave your like and comment on the comment section. Once again, letting me know which card would you get and why. Thank you very much, and see you in the next video, guys.